Some men are born legends, others are forced into it when the world pushes too far. In the far-off corners of the American frontier, where the land was older than memory and the wind carried stories darker than night, such legends began quietly, like a whisper before a storm. Rustwater Canyon was that kind of place. A forgotten cut of desert carved between towering red cliffs. Its sand shimmered under the sun and moaned under the moon. Travelers said the canyon breathed. Old-timers swore it remembered every life that passed through it. And somewhere between truth and tale lived a man named Jonah Hale. Jonah was not a loud man, nor a man hungry for trouble. He walked slow, spoke soft, and carried a calm that made even wild horses lower their heads. At 47, he had the look of someone who had lived through too many winters and too many memories, yet still carried kindness in the way he mended fences and left extra water out for travelers. He trapped for a living, beavers along the river bend, coyotes in the low brush, the occasional bobcat. Rustwater suited him, quiet, harsh, unforgiving, yet honest. A man could disappear in a land like this. Jonah had. His cabin sat a short ride from the only ranch within miles, a modest stretch of land run by a widow named Lara Ward. She had auburn hair usually braided tight beneath her sun-worn hat, and a stubborn resolve in her eyes that could outstare a rattler. Lara had taken over the ranch after her husband died in an accident 2 years back. Folks in nearby settlements respected her grit, how she kept the ranch running alone, how she refused pity from anyone. But Jonah saw more than grit in her. He saw the loneliness she carried carefully, like a lantern she refused to let blow out. He understood it. He carried one of his own. Every few days, Jonah passed by her ranch to bring supplies she might need, nothing she ever asked for, but everything she could use, extra firewood, water jugs, repairs for a broken gate hinge. She always thanked him with a soft smile and a warm cup of coffee. They rarely spoke long, but the quiet between them felt comfortable, like both were waiting for a moment neither dared reach for just yet. The land around them was a canvas painted with extremes. At dawn, the sun spilled molten gold across the cliffs. At noon, heat shimmered in waves, making the world feel unsteady. At dusk, the sky bled orange and violet, melting into a darkness that swallowed sound. Coyotes sang every night, their cries echoing off canyon walls like spirits calling to each other. Dust storms came fast and furious, walls of sand rolling across the flats, rattling windows and burying footprints in minutes. It wasn't such a storm that rumor first arrived. A traveling peddler had staggered into a nearby town, muttering about fires, robberies, and the Briarthorn Gang, a pack of cutthroats known for leaving nothing alive behind them. No one knew why they were moving south, but people whispered that someone powerful was pushing them there. Jonah heard fragments of the tale when he rode into Harrow Creek for supplies. Folks spoke with lowered voices, glancing over shoulders as if the gang themselves might materialize from the dust. They hit Bennett Ridge last week, a blacksmith told him, sweat mixing with soot on his brow. Burned half the place. Sheriff's boys didn't stand a chance. Jonah nodded but said nothing. He rarely asked questions. But he listened, more than most realized. On his way back to Rustwater Canyon, the wind shifted. The sky turned an unfamiliar shade, heavy with a tension that made the air taste metallic. Jonah felt it in his bones. Something was coming. He urged his horse, Bramble, into a steady trot. By mid-afternoon, he spotted a figure stumbling along the canyon trail, a man leaning heavily on a broken rifle like it was a crutch. Jonah slowed, approached cautiously. "You look about ready to fall over," Jonah said gently. The man squinted up at him, face pale beneath layers of dust. Blood matted his shirt. "They're coming," he rasped. Jonah dismounted in one fluid motion and caught the man before he collapsed. He propped him against a boulder and checked the wounds. A deep slash along his ribs, bruises across his jaw, and a bullet grazed along his shoulder. "Who did this?" Jonah asked. The traveler coughed, wincing. "Briar. Thorn. Gang. They—" He swallowed, breath shaking. "They're heading south, toward Rustwater." Jonah's expression barely changed, but something hard flickered behind his eyes, like embers stirred by a sudden wind. "You need water," Jonah said quietly. "I'll take you to the ranch. Lara will know what to do." "No time," the man whispered, shaking his head. "Ride. Warn your people. They're days ahead of anyone who can stop him." Jonah hesitated, but the man's stare was clear. This warning mattered more than his own life. Jonah helped him sit upright against the rock, left him with his canteen, and swung back onto Bramble. Rustwater Canyon felt different as Jonah rode, less like home and more like an echo chamber of something restless. Shadows seemed sharper. The wind hissed through sagebrush like a whispering warning. By the time he reached Alara's ranch, the sun was sinking behind the cliffs, throwing long crimson shadows across the ground. Alara stood by her barn, mending tack. She looked up the moment she heard the hooves. "You all right?" she asked. "Traveler on the trail," Jonah said, sliding off the saddle. "Says Briarthorn gang is coming this way." Alara's face went still. Her hands paused mid-movement. "South. Toward Rustwater." Jonah nodded. She swallowed, her eyes dropping for a moment before she spoke again. "Jonah, there's something I didn't tell you." He studied her quietly. 2 weeks back," she said, voice low, "a man came here. Said he spoke for the cattle baron up north, Franklin Coiner. Offered to buy my ranch. When I refused, he smiled like he already owned it." Her jaw tightened. "He said, one way or another, that land will be his." Jonah's breath grew steady, controlled in a way that hinted he was fighting something deep inside. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked. "Because I didn't want trouble," she said. "And because you've lived through enough." Jonah lowered his gaze. The shadows along his face deepened, revealing faint scars that crossed his jaw, his hands, the side of his neck, marks not from trapping or ranch work, but from another life entirely. Alara stepped closer, her voice softening. "Jonah, I've seen the way you move. The way you look at the horizon when you think no one's watching. You weren't always a trapper." Jonah didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence stretched between them, not empty, but heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. A gust of wind swept across the canyon, kicking up dust around their boots. Somewhere high above, an eagle screamed as if sensing the coming storm. "What should we do?" Alara asked. Jonah looked toward the far edge of the ranch. His eyes narrowed slightly, focusing on something distant. "First, we listen," he murmured. Alara frowned, but then she heard it too. Faint, rhythmic, growing louder. Hoofbeats. Not one. Not two. 3 riders. Silhouetted against the dying sun, 3 dark shapes crested the ridge, moving slow but deliberate, their shadows stretching long across the canyon floor like fingers reaching out. Alara's breath caught. Jonah's jaw set. The calm before the storm had ended, and Rustwater Canyon was about to learn what happened when the world pushed a quiet men too far. Night settled over Rustwater Canyon in a slow, creeping hush, the kind of hush that came before something terrible. The moon hung low, pale as a ghost's lantern, spilling silver light across Alara's ranch. Jonah Hale stood at the edge of the yard, listening to the wind skim through the dry grass. Even the coyotes were quiet tonight. That was the first sign. The second sign came as a faint tremor beneath the earth. Hoofbeats, distant but deliberate, rolling through the canyon like approaching thunder wrapped in shadows. Jonah's hand drifted toward the knife at his belt. He didn't draw it. He only touched the handle the way an old priest might touch a relic he swore he'd never use again. Alara stepped out from her cabin, a lantern in her hand, her eyes already searching his. "You hear it too," she whispered. Jonah nodded. He scanned the ridge, where moonlight carved sharp edges along the rocks. And then he saw them, 5 riders cresting the rise, silhouettes tall and crooked, their horses stomping restless in the dust. The Briarthorn gang had arrived. They rode down as if the land belonged to them, the crunch of gravel under hooves echoing across the yard. The leader, a heavy-set man with a long braided beard and eyes that glinted like a wolf's, pulled up first. His men spread out behind him, forming a loose circle. "Well, now," the leader drawled, grinning wide enough to show several gold teeth. "Ain't this cozy? Miss Alara Ward, right? The little lady who don't know how to share land with others." Alara lifted her chin, though the lantern trembled slightly in her grip. "I've got nothing for you. Turn around and ride out." The leader chuckled, deep and amused. "We ain't here for conversation. The Baron wants his deed. And we want a bit of entertainment." Jonah stepped forward, planting himself between Alara and the men. "There's no trouble here," he said evenly. "You can leave now." Laughter erupted from the gang, hard, ugly laughter that scraped like broken glass. "Would you look at that?" One outlaw jeered. "A trapper protecting his little ranch girl. How sweet." Another spat in the dust. "Move aside, old man." Jonah didn't budge. His eyes stayed calm, steady, as though he could anchor the entire canyon with his stillness alone. But the leader leaned forward in his saddle, studying him with a slow smirk. "You got grit," he said. "But grit ain't enough. We ain't here to chat, trapper. We're here to teach a lesson." Before Jonah could speak, two men lunged from the left. They grabbed Alara by the arms, wrenching her lantern from her hand and throwing it aside. She gasped, struggling, but the men held fast. "Stop," Jonah said, voice low and sharp. The leader nodded. Two more men moved behind Jonah, pressing the cold barrel of a rifle to his spine. "Ain't killing you yet," the leader said. "But you're gonna watch." Jonah's breath tightened. His fists clenched slowly at his sides as one outlaw shoved Alara onto her knees. Another ripped a ledger from her porch shelf, her records of livestock, finances, everything she'd worked for. A heavy hand slapped her across the face. Jonah jerked forward, but the gun at his back dug deeper. "Where's the rest of it?" the outlaw snarled. "Your savings. Your deeds. Your maps. You're hiding something." Alara's eyes watered, but not from fear, from fury. "You'll get nothing from me." The outlaw's boot swung hard, cracking against her ribs. She fell sideways with a sharp cry. Jonah's vision blurred at the edges. Rage, hot and familiar, rose like smoke he had spent years trying to smother. The moonlight flickered across the scars on his knuckles, old marks that whispered of battles fought in another lifetime. His chest tightened. Memories he fought to bury clawed their way back. Gunshots in the dark. Children crying. A bat shining under firelight. A voice calling him Long Shadow, a name spoken with both reverence and fear. Jonah had walked away from that world. Swore never to return to it. Swore never to kill again. "Tell her to talk," the leader said. Jonah's jaw locked. "You've done enough." "Oh no," the leader replied, swinging off his horse. "Not yet." He walked to Alara and grabbed her by the hair, jerking her to her feet. She spit in his face. He struck her again, harder this time, sending her crashing to the dirt. Her breath escaped in a pained gasp. Jonah inhaled sharply, fighting every instinct screaming to break free. His muscles shook with restraint, his heart pounding so violently it drowned out the wind. "Let her go," he said, voice trembling despite his control. "You gonna stop us, trapper?" the leader sneered. "With what?" "A rabbit snare." The men laughed again. Jonah closed his eyes. He forced himself still, the way he used to on the edge of battle. But that was the problem. He recognized the sensation, the coil tightening inside him. The storm he'd buried long ago. The gang pulled Alara toward the barn, dragging her across the ground. One kicked over her water barrel, spilling it across the dust. Another smashed a window. A third lit a torch and held it dangerously close to the wooden siding. Jonah's breath hitched. "Don't," he warned. The leader raised the torch, smirking. "Maybe we burn the place down. Start fresh." "Please," Alara rasped, staggering. "Leave my home, leave my land." The leader slammed the torch into the ground inches from her face. "Tell us where your gold is, sweetheart, or I'll light the whole place up." Jonah twisted suddenly, knocking his shoulder hard into the men behind him. The gun wavered. Jonah nearly broke free. Nearly, but two more gang members clamped down, forcing him to his knees. "Hold him," the leader ordered. "Make him watch." Then he drove his boot into Alara's gut. She gasped, folding over as air left her body. Another blow came, a backhand that split her lip. She stumbled, legs shaking. And Jonah saw her eyes begin to glaze. "No," Jonah whispered. "No, no." One final strike landed, a brutal fist to her temple. Alara crumpled to the dirt, limp and silent. Jonah's heart tore open. The leader wiped his knuckles casually on his vest. "Teach her not to disrespect the Baron." He turned, mounting his horse again. "Let's ride. We got what we needed." "Which was?" another asked. He grinned cruelly. "Fear." They rode off laughing, kicking up clouds of dust that swallowed their figures as they vanished into the canyon. Jonah remained bound by the grip of two gang members until the leader signaled for them to release him. They shoved him into the dirt and galloped away, leaving him kneeling beside Alara's unconscious body. When they were gone, Jonah crawled to her, his hand shaking uncontrollably. "Alara! Alara! Can you hear me?" He lifted her gently, brushing the dirt from her cheek. Her breathing came shallow, uneven. Rage burned through him, hot, silent, consuming. Not the wild rage of youth, but the kind that simmered with purpose. the kind that forged decisions no man could return from. He carried her inside the cabin, laid her on the bed, and lit a lamp. His fingers worked quickly, but every touch carried grief, cleaning her wounds, pressing cloth to the cut above her brow, whispering apologies she couldn't hear. "I should have stopped them," he murmured. I should have been enough." But deep inside, an old truth whispered back, "You were enough once." When she finally slipped into shallow but steady breathing, Jonah stepped outside. The night was silent now, a silence that didn't feel natural. It felt like the world holding its breath. Jonah walked slowly toward the dead cottonwood tree behind the barn, a tree long struck by lightning, its blackened trunk still reaching crookedly toward the sky. He knelt at its base and brushed aside the dirt. His fingers found a wooden handle buried beneath the soil. He pulled. A wooden box emerged, old and scarred. He paused, staring at it as if it were a ghost he'd hoped never to see again. But ghosts didn't stay buried. Not forever. With a deep breath, he opened the lid. Dawn crept over Rustwater Canyon in thin strands of rose and gold, spilling across the desert like a quiet promise. Jonah Hale stood at the edge of Alara's ranch, the duster coat draped across his shoulders, the long rifle slung behind him. His face carried the stillness of a man stepping back into a world he'd once abandoned, a man who knew that each step forward would change him forever. Behind him, Alara slept in her cabin, her breathing shallow but steady. Yet even from this distance, Jonah felt the weight of her bruises like a chain binding him to his decision. He mounted Bramble and rode into the paling horizon, becoming a moving silhouette swallowed by the canyon's winding veins. The Briarthorn gang had a full night's head start, but Jonah tracked them as though they were walking in wet paint. Every bent twig, every flake of disturbed dust, every cold campfire whispered the gang's path like a confession. Jonah read the ground the way a scholar reads scripture, slow, reverent, exact. Hours into the ride, thunderheads gathered over the mesas, stacking like dark towers. Lightning crawled along the Clydes, illuminating the desert floor in violent flashes. Jonah welcomed the storm. Thunder masked his approach, and the wind scrubbed away his tracks. He moved like a shadow unbound. By afternoon, he found the first sign they were getting careless. Hoof prints, 5 sets, cut across a dry wash. Beside them, faint boot marks. The leader's stride was limping. Jonah crouched, brushing fingers across the indentations. They were losing rhythm, panicking. The fear had begun. At dusk, he reached the cliffs overlooking a shallow valley where the gang had camped the night before. But something else caught his eye, drag marks leading to a ravaged wagon tipped on its side. Smoke still curled from its charred frame. Jonah rode down slowly, rifle ready. A man lay beside the wagon, bleeding from a shallow slash along his side. A woman knelt over him, tears streaking the dust on her cheeks, shielding 2 trembling children behind her skirts. When she saw Jonah approach, she raised a shaking hand, clutching a kitchen knife with more courage than skill. "I won't hit you," Jonah said softly, dismounting. "You one of them," she whispered. "One of the devils who—" "No," Jonah answered gently. "I'm hunting them." Her shoulders sagged with relief. They came at sundown. Took our horse, our food. They said they owned this land now." Her voice broke. "If you hadn't come, God, if you hadn't come." Jonah knelt beside the wounded men, tearing a strip from his own sleeve and pressing it against the wound. They headed east or north. The woman blinked at his certainty. "North, toward the high ridge." Why are you chasing them alone?" Jonah didn't answer. He didn't need to. She read it in his eyes. A storm, a purpose carved sharper than any knife. As he rose to leave, the children stared at him with wide eyes. One whispered, barely audible, "Mama, that's him, the Shadow Man from the stories." Jonah froze. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years. The Long Shadow. The mother hushed her child quickly, but it was too late. Jonah felt the past tighten around him. He nodded once to her, then mounted his horse and rode hard. Behind him, the woman whispered a prayer, not for Jonah, but for the men he hunted. Night fell heavy and thick, broken only by occasional lightning that tore the sky open and stitched it back again. The gang had made camp in a narrow ravine beneath jagged rocks. Their fire glowed dimly, more for comfort than warmth. They weren't laughing now. They weren't singing or boasting. They whispered, glancing over shoulders, flinching at every stray sound. "He's following us," one stammered. "I swear to God, Rig, I seen tracks that weren't there an hour before." Tracks don't appear out of thin air, the leader growled, though even his voice trembled. You didn't hear what the Baron said, another muttered. He said the long shadow used to track folks days after the trail went cold. Said he once hunted a mun across 3 territories, and the bastard never even heard him coming. That was years ago. Rig snapped. He's an old trapper now. Lightning flashed. Then thunder rolled. Then Jonah struck. His rifle cracked once. Clean. Precise. Echo swallowed by storm. One outlaw collapsed before the others even understood what happened. Panic exploded through the camp. Men scattered, firing into the darkness blindly. Jonah moved between shadows, unseen but everywhere, each shot deliberate. A man raised his pistol. Jonah disarmed him with a single shot that shattered the weapon from 50 yards away. Another ran for higher ground. Jonah appeared behind him, silent as dusk, and knocked him unconscious with the butt of his rifle. Rig barely escaped with 2 others, scrambling over boulders, abandoning their horses in terror. They slid down a rocky slope and disappeared into the narrow canyon that led toward the northern borderlands. Jonah did not chase immediately. He left something behind instead. On the trunk of a twisted mesquite tree, he carved 4 words. You hurt the wrong woman. The remaining outlaws saw it as they fled, and their screams echoed across the ravine. Fear wrapped around them like a noose. Far away, in a lavish parlor lit by golden lamps, Cattle Baron Franklin Coiner sipped whiskey from a crystal glass. His mustache twitched as one of his mercenaries finished speaking. The gang sending messages, the mun said nervously. They say someone's hunting him. Someone, not normal. Coiner scoffed. Outlaws scare themselves over shadows. This ain't just a shadow, sir. They said it's the long shadow. Coiner's hand froze midair. His glass slipped, shattering on the floor. The color drained from his face. Impossible. He retired. Quit. Vanished. He's back. Coiner swallowed hard. Then hire everyone. Gunmen, bounty hunters, deserters. Hell, hire devils if you must. If he's coming for me, I want an army between us. But fear had already seated itself deep. The long shadow was a ghost story whispered around campfires, a figure mothers used to warn reckless sons about. He had dismantled outlaw rings single-handedly, tracked killers through blizzards, and survived wounds that should have buried him. But in truth, Jonah Hale had walked away not because he was tired, but because he refused to slaughter innocent children during a government raid gone wrong. The world called him a monster for it. Now he was no longer hiding. Thunder rolled again as Jonah rode through the canyon, his coat snapping in the wind like black wings. Coiner's hired men set ambushes, sharp shooters perched on cliffs, traps laid across narrow passes, but Jonah dismantled each one methodically. Sometimes with a single, perfectly placed shot. Sometimes by ghosting through the night and leaving them tied or unconscious with their own weapons scattered around. He didn't kill unless forced. But fear he delivered in plenty. Rig's men began to crumble. Some deserted. Some turned on each other. One was found babbling incoherently under a lone cedar tree, whispering, "He's everywhere, everywhere." Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Alara woke with a gasp. The room spun, shadows swirling like smoke. Pain lanced through her ribs. She called Jonah's name before she even understood she was alone. She swung her legs off the bed, breath trembling, and stumbled onto the porch. The dead cottonwood tree caught her eye. The earth beneath it was disturbed. The wooden box was gone. "Oh, Jonah," she whispered. She knew what that meant. She knew what he'd become again. Fear and sorrow knotted together inside her chest, but something else flickered too. Determination. She wrapped her ribs, mounted her mare, and began following his trail through the desert. Their separate journeys twisted toward a single destination, a place no one had dared visit in years. The abandoned mining town of Copper Widow. A skeleton of a place. A graveyard of wood and rust. Where legends went to end. Copper Widow slept beneath a bruised sky, its crumbling buildings leaning like old drunks against the wind. Windows stared blankly, glass long shattered. Sun-bleached signs hung by a single nail, squeaking with every breath of the canyon breeze. Dust wandered the empty streets like restless spirits. This was where the earth swallowed men whole, an abandoned mining town with nothing left but echoes. Jonah Hale rode into the outskirts slow as dusk, Bramble's hooves crunching over broken stones. The long rifle rested across his saddle, his duster snapping in the wind like a raven's wings. He dismounted by the collapsed sheriff's office, letting the reins fall loose. The air felt heavy, charged, Copper Widow was waiting for him. And so were they. A shadow moved atop the saloon balcony. Another flickered behind the blacksmith's forge. Jonah's eyes tracked every motion, every flick of cloth, every glint of steel. The Briarthorn gang had crawled into the ruins like scorpions, hiding behind every tilted wall. A heavy laugh broke across the silence. Rick stepped out through the swinging saloon doors, the wind pushing them open with a slow, haunting creak behind him. "Well, look what crawled out of the canyon," he called. "Ain't much to look at, is he, boys?" Men emerged from both sides of the street, more than 5, more than 10. Reinforcements, hired guns, deserters, hard faces carved with greed and arrogance. And standing near the old water tower, his fancy coat blowing dramatically though he didn't deserve drama, was Cattle Baron Franklin Coiner. Hands gloved, boots polished, expression smug. He strode forward with the swagger of a man who had never fought a real fight in his life. "So the stories were true," Coiner said, smiling. "The long shadow walks again. But you're late, Hale. This town is your grave." Jonah didn't answer. His eyes scanned their positions, angles, shadows, cover. The silence in him deepened, a calm forged in places darker than this. He stepped forward, rifle in hand. Rick barked a laugh. "Shoot him." Gunfire erupted. Bullets screamed through the air, tearing splinters from the saloon posts, kicking dirt into violent spirals. But Jonah didn't run. He moved, not wildly, not desperately, but with measured grace, sliding behind a half-collapsed stone wall as bullets ricocheted. He counted shots, tracked reloads, watched shadows shift. Then he struck. One shot cracked from his rifle, clean, controlled. A rifleman on the balcony toppled backward with a startled cry. Another shot. Jonah pivoted behind the stone pillar, hitting a man who tried to flank. Screams scattered as the gang ducked for cover. "He ain't human," someone yelled. But Jonah was human. Terribly human. And heartbreak, rage, and love were driving every step. He ghosted between fallen timbers and collapsed porches, his boots whispering over dead leaves. A gunman rounded a corner, a flash of metal. Jonah's coat swept like a storm and his rifle but crashed into the man's skull. Another lunged from behind. Jonah twisted, delivered a sharp elbow to the throat, and vanished into shadow before the body even fell. Coiner grew pale. His confidence slipped like melting wax. "Do something," he snarled at Rig. "Kill him." Rig swallowed hard. "You first." Jonah's shadow flickered near the general store. Men fired wildly, but the bullets hit nothing but wood and dust. Then Jonah dropped from a balcony onto 2 gunmen below, rolling, rising, firing twice with deadly precision. Thunder rumbled overhead though the sky stayed dry, a warning from the heavens themselves. Then, just when the gang regrouped, hooves thundered from the eastern ridge. A lone rider appeared. Ilara. Her mare slid down the rocky incline, hooves skidding. She rode like fire itself was pushing her forward. Dust swirled behind her as she charged straight toward the battle. Jonah's heart lurched. Ilara. Her sudden arrival stunned the gang. A few aimed their guns at her. Jonah's shot rang out before theirs did, dropping the nearest threat-cold. Ilara swung down from her saddle, limping but standing strong, gripping a pistol she could barely lift. "You're not alone," she shouted. She fired, hit one outlaw square in the shoulder, sending him spinning. It wasn't perfect, but it was brave. Brave enough to shift the tide. Jonah moved with renewed fury. He stepped out from behind cover, drawing the attention of half the gang as he advanced. They fired. Jonah dove behind a wagon, bullets chewing through its rotting boards. He breathed hard, sweat mixing with dust, vision tunneling. A gunman climbed atop the stable roof, aiming at Jonah's exposed flank. "Ilara." Jonah barked. She spun, saw the danger, and shot instinctively. Her bullet clipped a man's arm, knocking his aim astray. His shot fired wide as Jonah rolled and finished him with a precise strike. But danger hit Jonah from the side, a blow to the ribs from a rifle butt. Pain exploded through him. He staggered, falling to one knee. A gunman stood over him, grinning, raising the barrel for the killing shot. Ilara screamed his name. She ran. Without thinking. Without fear. She slammed into the gunman, knocking his arm aside. The shot fired into the dirt. She clawed at him, kicked wildly. He threw her down, raising his pistol. Jonah surged up with a roar, tackling the man and slamming him into the wall so hard the boards cracked. Jonah's fist drove into the man's jaw, Then again, until the outlaw sank unconscious. Ilara lay coughing, breath shaking. Jonah knelt beside her, lifting her gently. Their eyes met, fear, relief, and something deeper passing between them in a breath. You shouldn't have come, he whispered. You shouldn't have gone alone, she whispered back. Across the street, Coiner watched, trembling with fury. End this, he screamed. Kill them both. But his men were broken, scattered. Some dropped their guns and ran. Others dropped to their knees, hands raised. Jonah rose slowly, shoulders squared, and began walking toward the Baron. Coiner backed up a step. Then another. Stay away, he hissed. You're just a man. Jonah stopped a few feet away. Dust swirled between them. His gaze was hard, steady, carved from something older than pain. A man's enough, he said softly, when he's had everything taken from him. Coiner's hand darted for the pistol at his belt, but Jonah was faster. His rifle cracked once. Coiner's weapon flew from his grasp, spinning into the dust. The Baron stumbled, fell backward, scrambling like a beetle flipped onto its back. No, wait, please. Jonah leveled the gun at him. Thunder boomed in the distance. Coiner's eyes filled with the terror of a man who finally understood consequences. You sent them, Jonah said. You let them hurt her. Coiner's lips trembled. She refused me, Jonah's finger tightened. And it was done. Coiner slumped in the dust, his empire ending not with applause but with a lonely sigh swallowed by the ruins of Copper Widow. The last remaining gunmen fled into the desert, leaving weapons where they fell. Only silence remained, heavy, expectant, settling over the town like a blanket. Ilara walked toward Jonah slowly, her hand trembling as she reached him. It's over, she murmured. He looked at her, exhaustion softening the sharp lines of his face. It's over, he echoed. Later, as dawn brushed the ruins with pale gold, a lawman from a nearby settlement arrived with men who had tracked the conflict. He approached Jonah cautiously, a badge glinting on his vest. We could use a man like you again, he said. The territory's changing. We need fighters. Heroes. Jonah shook his head. I've worn a badge, he replied. I won't wear one again. He looked at Ilara, the anchor in the storm he had become. The reason he'd risen. The reason he'd stop. The lawman nodded, understanding more than his words said. Jonah turned away from Copper Widow and toward the rising sun, Ilara at his side, her arm linked with his.